Can a civilization obsessed with immortality truly conquer time? Tonight we journey into the heart of ancient Egypt, where time stirs gently in the sands and forgotten kings whisper in the moonlight. You're standing at the edge of the Nile. The air is thick with the scent of date palms, warm clay, and the faint trace of frankincense wafting from a distant altar. The dunes shimmer gold in the dying sun, and somewhere beyond those undulating waves of sand, a jackal cries lonely and shrill. Beneath your feet is the ancient earth, trodden by sandals thousands of years before yours. You see a flicker in the distance, a flickering torchlight, or something older, stranger. You step closer. The soft rustle of linen, the crunch of sand underfoot. A sudden cold breath, as if the tomb ahead has exhaled. You've heard the stories. Treasures hidden behind false walls. Tomb curses engraved in sacred ink. Hieroglyphs that dare you to read them. And unless you know how to outwit a 1,000-year-old booby trap, well, let's just say it might not be your best night. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch beside the entrance to a crumbling tomb half swallowed by the dunes. The sandstone is warm from the day's heat. You press a hand against it, smooth but etched with the faint lines of ancient writing. There's no door, just a gap. A whisper in the dark. You crawl in. Instantly, it's cooler. Not cold, just enough to raise goosebumps. The light behind you vanishes. The sound of the world fades, replaced by your own breath and the soft drip of water in the dark. You're not the first. Over millennia, this passage has felt the palms of grave robbers, priests, mourners, even archaeologists with fancy degrees and fragile lanterns. But now it's yours, and the deeper you go, the more time unravels. This isn't a corridor, it's a thread pulling you backward. Let's rewind. Over 5,000 years ago, there's no pyramid here. No tomb, just river and mud, and men hauling reeds to build homes that would wash away each flood season. The Nile, ever generous, spills into the land. Kemet, they call it the Black Land. Rich with silt, lush, alive. And then the kings begin. The first dynasties rise from myth. Narmer or maybe Menes Egyptologists still debate whether they were the same person or two. He unifies the upper and lower kingdoms. Suddenly papyrus blooms into script. Power becomes eternal. You can almost see him wrapped in leopard skin, a crown that's both red and white, standing by the sacred river while priests chant. His footsteps are said to stir the gods themselves. No pressure. Right. With unification comes an idea the world will borrow for centuries' order. Ma'at. Not just peace, but balance. Cosmic harmony. If you're pharaoh, you're not just a ruler, You're the divine keystone in that cosmic equation. Your job, keep the sun rising, keep the floods coming, keep chaos at bay. And chaos, it's always waiting. It seeps in through rebellion, drought, or bad dreams from a vengeful god. That's why Egypt builds stone. Stone lasts. Stone anchors eternity. You carve your name into it, and you'll never be forgotten. Probably. You step into a chamber. Light from your torch glances off wall paintings, figures walking sideways, holding strange implements. A man with a jackal head, a woman with a throne on hers. There's incense in the air even now, somehow. Every figure here is symbolic, not decoration, invitation. You are expected to understand. To know that a crook and flail aren't farm tools, but divine emblems of rule and protection. That a lotus is not just a flower, it's rebirth. Every inch of wall tells a story if you can read it. And if you can't, well, good luck navigating the afterlife. Because yes, there's a whole manual for that. The Egyptians didn't just hope there was life after death. They wrote directions. The Book of the Dead, a mix of spells, passwords, and rituals, is their cosmic GPS. Want to cross the lake of fire? Better know the name of the crocodile god guarding it. Want your heart to weigh less than a feather? Better not have stolen a sacred cow or insulted your mother-in-law. Yes, really. And yet with all this spiritual prep, you can't help but notice something. Egyptians were afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of improper burials. Afraid that without the right amulets, words, or embalming technique, their soul would be lost in the duat, forever trapped in darkness, devoured by Amit, the crocodile lion hippo beast who dines on the unworthy. But fear drove innovation. It inspired architects to design maze-like tombs with false passages. It birthed entire careers for people whose job was to erase your enemies from the record so they'd vanish in the afterlife. And it made for some really dramatic burial rituals involving gold masks, boats, and jars full of, well, let's just say organs with attitude. You pause in the next room. Here lies a sarcophagus. The lid is slightly ajar. Not enough to climb in, don't worry, not that kind of bedtime story, but just enough to suggest someone once tried. You peer inside. Dust. Wrappings. A single scarab carved from lapis lazuli resting where a heart might have been. Its blue glints in the torchlight. It's beautiful. It's probably cursed. You don't touch it. Outside, the jackals howl again. But inside, it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. The heartbeat of someone standing between two worlds. Welcome, traveler. You've crossed the threshold. You move deeper into the tomb, your torch flickering against the ancient walls. The air is dry and still, but you sense movement, not physical, but historical, spiritual. Each step echoes through time. You're not walking alone. You're walking with kings. Ahead, the corridor splits. One path continues downward, steeper, almost swallowing the light. The other, it curves more deliberately, like someone wanted to lead you, not lose you. You choose the curve. Always pick the path the architects feared to trap. A faint draft grazes your cheek. There's a space ahead. You step through, and find yourself in a chamber unlike the others. It's vast, domed, carved to resemble the celestial sphere, complete with constellations in golden paint. A false sky for a very real secret. But your eyes drift downward, because at the center of this chamber lies the tomb of Thutmose III, or perhaps just his likeness, hidden in this replica of his original crypt in the Valley of the Kings. The sarcophagus, massive and glowing with ochre tones, is ringed by painted guards and protective deities. You imagine what this room once looked like by torchlight on the night of his burial. Priests chanting sacred oils poured over the body, a cobra carved on the lid to ward off evil. And yet this is where we begin to see the danger of legacy. The ancients were obsessed with protection. From traps made of shifting stones and collapsible walls to inscriptions that warned intruders of divine retribution. One such inscription on a 19th dynasty tomb read, "He who disturbs this tomb will be devoured by the serpent who knows no mercy." Comforting. You step closer to the walls. There are panels here, flat stones with seams. You run a finger along one, and something clicks. Just once. A whisper of movement, you freeze. But nothing happens. Yet. It's a reminder every tomb was both a home for the dead and a fortress against the living. And some of the protections were less physical, more mythic. Enter the tomb curse. Now, academically speaking, most curses were just stern warnings. But when the early 20th century press reported the mysterious deaths of several men who'd entered Tutankhamun's tomb, including Lord Carnarvon, public fascination exploded. Coincidence, infection, revenge from the gods. Egyptologists still debate whether anything supernatural happened, or if everyone was just allergic to ancient bat guano. But let's go back even earlier to the Old Kingdom. The tomb of Kentika Ikeki, a judge from around 2400 BCE, bears one of the oldest known inscriptions resembling a curse. Translated, it says, "As for any man who shall enter this tomb, I shall seize him like a goose. He shall be judged by the great God." Not exactly poetry, but definitely effective. Still, curses weren't the main deterrent. Architecture was. Some tombs had fake doors carved into the rock, illusory thresholds for the spirit, or misleading bait for would-be thieves. Others were riddled with dead-end corridors, concealed drop shafts, or stone slabs weighing tons set to fall if triggered. You think Indiana Jones had it rough? Try being a looter in 1200 BCE without plot armor. And yet many tombs were robbed. Even during Egypt's golden age, thieves came. Sometimes they were outsiders. But often, here's the twist, they were insiders. Workers. Guards. Even priests. In times of famine or political collapse, the temptation was too great. After all, these tombs were stocked with gold spices, rare oils and statues made of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. It was like leaving Fort Knox unguarded and hoping nobody peeked. To combat this, some tombs were buried beneath decoy mounds. Others relocated entirely. Pharaohs like Ramesses II had their sarcophagi moved posthumously, re-hidden by loyal priests desperate to protect them. Think of it like ancient witness protection, but for mummies. You kneel by a broken panel. The stone here has been pried open. Someone's been here before you, but they didn't get far. You see a rusted bronze chisel and a faint red smear, possibly paint. Possibly not. The torchlight dances on something nearby, a faded painting of a jackal-headed figure leading a man by the hand. This is Anubis god of embalming psychopomp of souls. He's shown here guiding the deceased through the weighing of the heart. It's not just art, it's reassurance. Even in death, you're not alone. You're accompanied. Judged, yes, but not abandoned. You remember a curious tidbit in some burial chambers. Small statues called shabtis were included. Servant figures meant to work for the dead in the afterlife. If I am called upon to till the fields, the spell goes, you shall say, here I am. Ancient Egyptians basically invented ghost interns. And yet, with all these protections, all these rituals, some tombs were still desecrated. Which begs the question, did the ancient Egyptians succeed in preserving eternity? Depends how you define it. Their bodies, their names, their stories, many did endure. They echo now in the world's museums, in the books we read, in the flickering torchlight of your imagination. But others lost, collapsed beneath the sands, stolen, or simply misremembered their gods, renamed their curses, dulled. Still you're here, walking where their feet once pressed the ground, breathing the same dry air, reading their fears on the walls. You reach the final chamber. At the center is a pedestal. No body, no gold, just a stone tablet. Upon it is etched a single line in flowing hieroglyphs. It translates loosely to, "The silence that guards me is older than the stars." You sit for a moment. The tomb exhales again. Dust stirs like memories in the dark. One more glance at the wall. A mural of a sunboat crossing the sky. The pharaoh aboard, spear in hand, battling the great serpent Apep, who threatens to swallow the dawn. Every night this battle plays out. Every night Ra fights to rise again. And thanks to the rituals, the protections, the eternal stone, he does. At least for one more day, you emerge from the tomb and step into the brilliance of morning. The air is crisp and cool just for a few golden moments before the desert heat asserts itself. The Nile glistens in the distance like a ribbon of light, winding through a land that shouldn't exist, but somehow does. A green miracle stitched into endless sand. You walk now among giants. Before you rise the pyramids of Giza, shimmering under the rising sun. The sheer audacity of them still catches you off guard. They're too big, too perfect, too permanent. Even the nearby camels seem unimpressed, as if to say, yeah, we see these every day. You look up at the Great Pyramid of Khufu, once sheathed in polished white limestone that reflected sunlight so fiercely the Greeks called it the shining light. Today, most of the casing stones are gone, quarried off for mosques and palaces centuries ago. But the core remains resolute and rough. Go ahead. Try to count the stones. You won't? There are roughly 2.3 million blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The precision is baffling, edges aligned to sub-millimeter perfection, the sides oriented almost exactly to true north. Egyptologists agree it took about 20 years to build, but how they did it? Still up for debate. Ramps. Maybe internal spiral passageways. Possibly alien forklifts. Less likely. But let's be honest, it would explain a few things. You touch one of the stones, it's warm already, sun-bleached and coarse under your fingertips. It smells of chalk and deep time. You imagine hauling it here, dragging it on wooden sleds, lubricated with water to reduce friction. Some say tens of thousands of workers were involved. Not slaves, as was long believed, but a paid, rotating labor force, villagers fed with bread, beer, and onions. Yes, onions. Don't laugh. They were considered nutritious, almost sacred, and vital to the pyramid diet. So if you ever want to build a world wonder, start with carbs and tears. Around you, smaller pyramids dot the landscape, those of queens, nobles, and forgotten princes. Their masonry is less precise, more eroded. Not everyone had Khufu's budget. You climb slightly higher ground to the plateau's edge and turn back for a better view. There it is. The full Giza complex stretching like a monument to human stubbornness. 3 great pyramids, Khufu, Khafra, Menkaure. The solar boat pits, the mastaba tombs, and of course watching silently the great Sphinx. Half lion, half man, nose missing, expression unreadable. Carved from a single limestone outcrop, the Sphinx is older than most of the structures around it. Some scholars argue it predates Khafra's pyramid entirely based on erosion patterns and stylistic mismatches. Others dismiss that as wishful fringe theory. The debate continues as it always does. Egyptologists still can't agree if the Sphinx's face is Khafra someone else or a generic divine ruler template. You approach its paws immense and worn. Between them once stood the dream stele of Thutmose IV, who claimed he fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx and was told in a dream that he'd be king if he cleared away the sand. A clever PR move, if ever there was one. You sit for a moment beneath its gaze. It feels indifferent, like time itself, like something that's seen too much to care anymore. Your mind drifts to the logistics. How do you organize a pyramid? You'd need an administrative system that rivals modern startups. Scribes to count the stones, cooks to feed thousands, rope makers, engineers, medics, priests, brewers. Yes, beer was a staple. At the workers' village, discovered nearby archaeologists found remains of fish cattle and bread ovens large enough to host a bake-off worthy of Ra himself. In fact, evidence points to remarkably humane conditions, medical care for broken bones, regular rations, even workers buried with honor. These weren't faceless masses. These were people with names, homes, and aching backs who helped build eternity. And yet, you wonder what compels a civilization to devote so much to death. Because for Egyptians, death wasn't an end. It was a transformation. a journey, and a pyramid. That's not a tomb. That's a resurrection machine. Each angled side mirrors the sun's rays guiding the soul skyward. The burial chamber is aligned with Orion, the constellation associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. Every block, every angle, every hieroglyph is part of a grand cosmic spell. You notice a small antechamber nearby, open to the public, mostly ignored. Inside, it's dim, cool. Carved graffiti lines the walls, not from the ancient Egyptians, but from Greek and Roman tourists. Even Napoleon's soldiers left their names here in dusty script. People have always wanted to leave their mark. But while they carved names, the Egyptians carved eternity. And not always perfectly. Some pyramids failed. You remember the bent pyramid at Dashur, its angle awkwardly changing halfway up an engineering adjustment, or maybe a panic correction when it started to collapse. Or the Pyramid of Unas, the first to include the pyramid texts, magic spells etched directly into the walls to help the king rise into the heavens. Practical, debatable. Poetic, undeniably. Your gaze drifts once more across the stones. You think of a fringe theory you once read, that the pyramids were power plants using limestone granite and underground water to generate energy. Completely unproven, but imaginative. Then again, what isn't? When staring at a 400- or 500-year-old skyscraper, you lie back on the warm rock head tilted toward the sky. Hawks circle. The breeze smells faintly of desert sage. You feel small, but also anchored. Because when you touch these stones, when you walk these corridors, when you listen closely enough, you realize the pyramids weren't built for the dead. They were built so that the living would never forget. You descend from the plateau following a worn stone path that winds past weathered mastabas and forgotten stelae. The sun arcs higher now, casting crisp shadows across the sand. The pyramids recede behind you, but their weight stays like an idea lodged in your chest. Ahead lies something different, not stone, but power in ink and incense. You enter a complex of low buildings, no colossal obelisks, no massive tombs, but inside the real pulse of ancient Egypt. Welcome to the House of Life. Part scriptorium, part temple, part training ground for minds so sharp they could make a god blink. The smell hits you first. Aged papyrus, warm beeswax, and crushed herbs. A scribe passes you robes, crisp reed stylus, tucked behind one ear. You peek into a narrow room and see rows of students bent over long desks, copying glyphs with such precision you'd think they were tattooing the air. This is where scribes are born. Becoming one is no small feat. First, you learn hieratic script, a cursive version of hieroglyphics used for everyday writing. Then come the classics: hymns, legal decrees, love poems, tax rolls. Your handwriting must be divine, your grammar impeccable. One missed loop could turn glory into toilet, which, as you can imagine, made for some awkward oaths to the gods. But the scribe is more than a human Xerox. He's the state's lifeline. Without scribes, no tax is collected, no army is provisioned, no grain is measured or floodwaters recorded. Pharaohs can command armies, but scribes, they build nations with ink. You pass into a dimmer chamber now, quieter. Smoother walls painted with delicate scenes of priests in leopard skin robes, pouring libations, whispering prayers. This is where you find the temple elite, the priests. In ancient Egypt, priests are not merely religious figures. They are scientists, doctors, engineers, and bureaucrats. Their temples house astronomical records, medical papyri, even botanical gardens for sacred herbs. These men, and sometimes women, wield both ritual power and political influence, often rivaling the pharaohs themselves. And then there's the knife. You overhear a chant from a side alcove. A priest stands over a stone altar, reenacting the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual performed on statues, and the deceased to awaken them, allowing breath speech and consumption in the afterlife. But here's the twist sometimes: that knife wasn't ceremonial. Behind the veils of incense and gold temples could be ruthless. In times of weak rule, powerful priests, especially those of Amun at Thebes, amassed land troops and wealth, even minting their own coins. At one point, during the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt was effectively split between a pharaoh in the north and a priest-king in the south. Civil war by incense stick. You step outside again and are greeted by the bleating of goats. A courtyard where offerings are sorted. Goats, geese, grain, fish, all meticulously recorded by scribes standing nearby with pallets in hand. Nothing escapes documentation. There's even a guy writing down which priest gets the left thigh of a sacrificial ox. Some perks come with the robe. But the real magic, it's hidden in scrolls locked behind polished cedar doors. You're invited in just this once. The room is cool, lined with niches containing papyrus scrolls. You unroll one slowly. The ink smells faintly of myrrh. It's a medical text from the Ebers Papyrus, describing remedies for everything from toothaches to flatulence. A mainstream fact: Egyptian doctors could perform basic surgery, set bones, and knew enough anatomy to remove cysts and tumors. They even had proto-dentists, although honestly, dentistry back then was mostly hope and honey. But here's your quirky tidbit: one contraceptive recipe involved crocodile dung, acacia, and honey applied. Let's just say internally. Effective? Probably not. But hey, it's the thought that counts. Back to the priests. They were keepers of secret names, divine mathematics, and celestial calendars. Many temples aligned with astronomical phenomena, sunlight piercing through pillars on solstices, star patterns mirrored in floor plans. These were not random designs. They were architectural prayers, or cosmic compasses. You sit now with an elder scribe named Hori. His fingers are stained dark with ink. He teaches the new apprentices a hymn to Thoth, god of wisdom, whose ibis-headed silhouette is painted nearby. To write is to preserve the voice of the gods, he tells them. Then to you, and to miswrite is to mishear. You ask him what happens to bad scribes. He chuckles. They become accountants. He's kidding. Mostly. As the sun shifts, You hear bells, small bronze ones, tied to a ritual procession. A line of priests and singers clad in white linen winds through the courtyard, carrying statues in gold palanquins. They're reenacting the daily awakening of the god's image. Washing, anointing, clothing, feeding. It's divine hospitality every day forever. You marvel at how much labor, devotion, and precision go into maintaining cosmic order. Every role, from the high priest of Karnak to the humble goat counter, contributes to Ma'at balance. The idea that the world is kept afloat by action, harmony, and reverence. You catch a glimpse of a dark corridor leading downward, restricted, of course. That's where the inner sanctuary lies. Only the high priest may enter. Only he sees the god's true image. Or perhaps not even he. The idol may remain veiled, its voice heard only in dreams. Egyptologists still debate the true nature of divine icons. Were they literal vessels for gods, psychological symbols, or tools of control? The records remain ambiguous, perhaps intentionally so. You take one last look around the temple. The sun now slants low through the colonnades, painting golden lines on the dusty flagstones. Scribes still scribble, priests still chant. And in the distance, a new scroll begins. The Nile flows quiet beneath the dusk, a ribbon of twilight separating two worlds. You stand now on a balcony in Alexandria, watching the stars shimmer above whitewashed walls and the occasional flicker of oil lamps. There's laughter in the distance. You hear water sloshing in harbor jugs, the creak of ropes from ships below, the soft shush of linen gowns in motion. Egypt is still Egypt, but this Egypt is different. This is the world of Cleopatra. And spoiler alert, she's not Egyptian. You step through a colonnaded hallway, lined with scrolls and vines. Marble gleams underfoot, and statues of Greek philosophers share alcoves with hieroglyph-covered obelisks. Alexandria isn't just a city, it's a living contradiction. Founded by Alexander the Great, it's part Egyptian, part Macedonian, part dream. The pharaoh still rules, temples still rise, but the gods now speak in Greek accents. At the heart of this hybrid empire stands Cleopatra VII Philopator. You imagine her now, not the Hollywood version with the snake and the eyeliner, but the real woman, brilliant, multilingual, politically ruthless, and yes, very good at making Rome nervous. She speaks 9 languages, including Egyptian, unusual for her dynasty, the Ptolemies, who typically kept to Greek. That alone sets her apart. You're ushered into a room of maps and ledgers. Cleopatra studies grain inventories with her advisors. Rome depends on Egypt's wheat, and she knows it. The Nile's fertility gives her power that swords can't. She uses it. Shrewdly. There's a scent in the room. Rose oil and parchment. She signs a papyrus scroll and turns toward you with a smirk. Don't be fooled. She isn't just the seductress of legend. That narrative mostly Roman propaganda, courtesy of her eventual enemies. Roman writers especially. Octavian's crew had a vested interest in framing Cleopatra as a corrupting femme fatale, a foreign danger to Roman masculinity. You know, standard smear campaign 30 BCE edition. But back to the beginning. Cleopatra was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty rulers of Egypt since Alexander's death in 323 BCE. Despite their ruling Egypt for centuries, they remained culturally Greek. Sibling marriage was common in the family. Poisonings, also common. You might say the Ptolemies made the House of the Dragon look like wholesome family TV. When Cleopatra comes to power, Egypt is fractured. She co-rules with her younger brother husband, Ptolemy III, who tries to have her killed. She flees, regroups, re-enters the palace, smuggled inside a rolled-up carpet unfurled dramatically at Julius Caesar's feet. That part actually true. Cue romance. Cue politics. Cue the birth of Caesarion, her son, by Caesar, whose very existence threatens Octavian's grip on Rome's future. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra turns her charm and strategy toward Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals. They form both a romantic and political alliance. Children follow. So do festivals, games, and endless rumors. At one point, Antony grants Cleopatra titles and lands that outrage Rome, proclaiming her Queen of Kings, while seated beside her in full regalia. Rome loses its toga. Back home, Octavian, soon to become Augustus Caesar, fans the flames. He accuses Antony of abandoning Roman virtues for Egyptian decadence, of being bewitched, of surrendering Rome to a woman. The truth, far more complex. But nuance rarely wins in politics. You're standing now in Cleopatra's garden, where palm trees sway and lotus blooms float in moonlit ponds. You pause beside a cat-shaped perfume bottle. Remember that from earlier, carved from alabaster? It's filled with kai-fi, a sacred fragrance made from honeywine myrrh and raisins. Cleopatra is said to have created her own perfumes, using them as subtle power tools, fragrance diplomacy, you might say. One scent for seduction. One for war councils. One perhaps for mourning. Because eventually the war comes. The Battle of Actium 31, BCE. Antony and Cleopatra's forces clash with Octavian's in a massive naval engagement. Things go wrong. Fast. Confusion. Misdirection. Cleopatra's ships retreat. Antony follows. The battle is lost. So is the empire. They return to Alexandria. The city holds its breath. Here's where history blurs. Antony, misled into believing Cleopatra is dead, falls on his sword. Cleopatra, soon after, ensures her legacy first by trying to negotiate with Octavian. When that fails, she chooses death. Not by ass-peep bite, as legend claims, that's debated. Maybe poison, maybe venom, maybe even assisted suicide arranged by loyal servants. Egypt, so long unconquered, becomes a Roman province. Cleopatra's death marks the end not just of her dynasty, but of pharaonic Egypt itself. No more native kings. No more divine rule. The gods retreat. The temples fall silent. And yet, You stand now on the remains of the royal palace, most of it submerged beneath modern Alexandria's harbor. Divers have found statues of Isis coins with Cleopatra's profile fragments of the once great library's columns. The sea keeps her secrets, but not all of them. Egyptologists still debate her final resting place, somewhere near Taposiris Magna, a hidden tomb beneath the sea. Some even believe her grave lies in the desert, masked as a lesser noble's shrine. If it's ever found, it could rival Tutankhamun's tomb in significance. But for now, Cleopatra sleeps in legend. And you walk away from the harbor. The stars shimmer like silver grain tossed into the sky. You think of a woman who outwitted empires, made war and love in the same breath, and refused to be remembered as just a seductress. In truth, she wasn't Egyptian by blood, but by legacy, she was Egypt's last pharaoh. The moon hangs low over the water as you journey south along the Nile, where lotus blossoms dot the shallows and reeds whisper ancient songs. Your boat glides past ruined temples and sleepy crocodiles sunbathing on the banks. You're entering sacred territory now, not of kings and queens, but of creatures who once wore crowns of their own. Welcome to Egypt's sacred zoo. You disembark near the ruins of Bubastis, once the gleaming capital of feline adoration. You hear the purr before you see them slender, sharp-eyed, utterly indifferent cats winding through fallen columns and curling on sun-warmed stone. This was once the epicenter of worship for Bastet, the cat-headed goddess of home fertility and protection. But don't let the sweet reputation fool you. Her claws were sharp when needed. You pass a broken alabaster shrine. In its center is a bronze figure of Bastet, sleek, poised, wearing an ornate earring. In her paw, a sistrum, an instrument used in temple music. Cats here weren't pets. They were protectors. Killing one, even accidentally, could spark mob violence. Yes, there are actual records of people being torn apart by grieving locals for harming a cat. A mainstream fact. Many Egyptian homes kept cats, not just for spiritual reasons, but practical ones. They controlled pests, protected food stores, and guarded against snakes. They earned their reverence. You pause beside a low stone basin. Inside lie the mummified remains of dozens of cats wrapped in linen, tiny faces painted. Thousands of feline mummies have been unearthed across Egypt, some buried with their owners, others in great cat necropolises, complete with offering bowls and ceremonial incense. And it wasn't just cats. Farther upriver, you arrive at Kom Ombo, the double temple dedicated to two very different deities, Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile, and fertility, and Haroeris, a form of Horus. One half of the temple is regal and calm, the other fierce and toothy. Here, crocodiles were revered, not reviled. Mummified, worshipped, and even kept in pools within the temple grounds. The largest of them were adorned with gold bracelets and gem-studded collars. You stare down into a glass case. Inside, a perfectly preserved croc mummy jaws frozen mid-snap. A priest whispers nearby that Sobek was a creator god. He birthed the world from the Nile's waters. Try forgetting that next time you go swimming. Still not done with the sacred safari. Let's talk about cobras. The uraeus, the rearing cobra, you've seen on every pharaoh's crown, represents Wadjet, a protective goddess of Lower Egypt. The belief, she spat venom at enemies of the king and burned them with fire from her third eye. Charming. You're invited into a small chamber beside a temple entrance. On its walls, frescoes of Wadjet coil around the pharaoh's body like armor. In one scene, she launches herself from his brow in a trail of fire, early fantasy art, if you will. You remember a peculiar tidbit here. Cobra handlers in Egypt were part showman, part priest. Some performed snake-charming rituals. Others trained cobras to stay curled in baskets as living symbols. And yes, accidental bites were common. That's why priests kept antidotes on hand, mostly herbal poultices and raw courage. Your animal tour continues. In the shadow of Edfu's massive columns, you glimpse the silhouette of a falcon soaring above. That's Horus's bird, representing kingship, vengeance, and the sky. Horus often appears as a man with a falcon's head. His left eye, injured in battle with Set, became the Eye of Horus, a powerful protective symbol found on amulets, coffins, and eyeliner kits. Probably. Even today, Egyptian fishermen sometimes tattoo the Eye of Horus on their boats for protection. Superstition, tradition, a little of both. You take a moment to rest beneath a palm tree, watching a sacred ibis pick its way along the riverbank. These elegant birds were associated with Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. Priests kept entire flocks in temple aviaries. Archaeologists have unearthed over 4 million ibis mummies near Tuna el Gebel, wrapped, tagged, and stacked like a divine bird library. You can't help but wonder how many of them were scribes in a past life. At this point, you may be wondering, did Egyptians just worship every animal? Not quite. It wasn't the animal itself, but what it represented, its spirit, its divine aspect. Many gods had animal heads or companions to symbolize traits: strength, speed, vision, fertility, cunning. The sacred creatures were manifestations of divine energy, not mere mascots. But sometimes, the lines blurred. There's a famous open debate among Egyptologists about whether these animals were seen as avatars of gods, living representations to be treated as divine, or merely symbols treated respectfully but not literally worshipped. For example, some bulls were selected at birth, raised in luxury, and declared the earthly form of Apis a powerful fertility god. These bulls had their own priests' jewelry and even tombs carved from granite. After death, full mummification complete with funerary rituals. You walk now through the ruins of the Serapeum of Saqqara, where those sacred bulls were entombed. Each sarcophagus is the size of a minibus, carved so precisely that even modern tools would groan. The air in here hums, as if the stone remembers. And finally, a surprise creature you didn't expect: scarabs. Tiny beetles rolling dung across the desert floor, yet central to Egyptian symbolism. The god Khepri, A scarab-headed being represented the rising sun and rebirth. He was believed to push the sun across the sky like a cosmic dung ball. Yes, poetic and a little gross. Scarab amulets were worn for protection, placed on the heart during mummification, inscribed with prayers, even given as love tokens. Think of them as ancient emojis, except made of faience and magic. Night falls again. You sit by a quiet stretch of river. Frogs sing. Papyrus rustles. A cat curls beside you, tail flicking lazily. The stars wheel overhead, and for a moment you feel what the ancients must have felt, that every animal, every breath, every ripple of the Nile was part of something bigger. A world where gods had fur feathers and fangs, and they watched you back. The sky is deep velvet now, and the stars burn with impossible clarity. You've left the sacred animals behind and stepped into a quiet grove near an ancient temple ruin. The air smells of crushed papyrus and cool stone. And here, nestled beneath broken lintels and crumbling pylons, you find something even more potent than pyramids or cobras. Words. Specifically forbidden ones. You're entering the shadowy realm of spells, scrolls, and secret knowledge where every hieroglyph is more than decoration. It's a key. And every key opens a door you might regret stepping through. You duck beneath an arch and enter what remains of a temple library. Shelves long gone, but the niches remain. These were once filled with papyrus scrolls meticulously inked with texts on astronomy, healing mathematics, and the Book of the Dead. Except that's not its real name. The ancient title was The Book of Going Forth by Day. Less ominous, more hopeful. A manual for navigating the afterlife. You kneel beside a broken fragment of scroll carefully tucked inside a protective box of cedar. Faint ink remains, spell 125. You know this one. The weighing of the heart. Your soul is judged before Osiris and the 42 assessors of Ma'at. You must confess, I have not stolen. I have not slain. I have not uttered falsehood. Your heart is placed on a scale against the feather of truth. If it's heavier, you're devoured by Amit, the soul-munching monster. That's not ideal, which is why people prepared. Like a lot. Spells were tailored, customized, and often commissioned by wealthier families. Scribes would even insert the deceased's name into the spell texts to ensure it worked properly. It's not unlike filling out a passport form, except this one helps you cross into eternity. You step deeper into the ruined scriptorium. On a nearby wall, a faded mural shows a priest reciting over a mummy, while another paints magical signs on linen wrappings. You recognize the symbol of Jed, the pillar of stability. The Ankh for life, the Waz scepter for power. These weren't random doodles. They were activated magic hieroglyphs believed to carry force simply by being written or spoken. A mainstream fact, Egyptian writing was never just symbolic. It was sacred technology. The gods created writing. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, gave it to humanity not as a tool, but a divine inheritance. And that meant words had power, real power. You notice something in a corner, a small open scroll. Less formal, less tidy. This one doesn't contain funerary rites or state decrees. It's a love spell. Written in demotic script, more cursive and casual, it calls upon Isis to bring a named woman to the writer. It lists her charms, begs for her affection, and ends with a command. Let her heart burn until she finds me. Romantic, creepy little of both. But it's proof that magic wasn't just for the dead. Egyptians used spells for everyday life. Love, childbirth, illness, protection from snakes, revenge on annoying neighbors. There were even incantations to ward off nightmares, often involving strategically placed amulets and recitations whispered before bed. Hey, we've all been there. One scroll nearby details a spell to summon a dream of a lost loved one. The ritual involves sleeping on a special stone slab, drinking a potion of beer and blue lotus, and whispering the name of the dead. If the gods willed it, they would appear to you. If not, well, hope you didn't mix up your ingredients. And speaking of ingredients, welcome to ancient Egypt's version of the potion shop. On a chipped table lies a recreated apothecary list. Your fingers trace the names myrrh, frankincense, honey, crocodile fat, crushed turquoise, ground mummy powder. Wait, mummy powder? Yep. In the later periods, especially under Greek and Roman influence, it was believed that ground mummy, actual bits of preserved human, had healing properties. Oddly, the practice persisted into medieval Europe, where mumia was sold as medicine. Egypt's final revenge. Possibly. Now a quirky tidbit. Egyptian spells often used puns. The word for to protect sounds like the word for to bind, so protective spells would intentionally confuse enemies, human or spiritual, by binding them with clever wordplay. In one spell, the demon is told he cannot see because the light sees you not, which is ancient trash talk with spiritual consequences. In a side room, you find a chalkboard-like slab once used by apprentice scribes. It's covered in practice glyphs, including multiple misspelled versions of life and prosperity. Even 3,000 years ago, students struggled with their homework. Some things never change. You sit down on a stone bench, the only piece of furniture left unbroken. The air buzzes with dust motes and memory. Egyptologists still debate whether common folk had access to all spells or only elites. Some say village magic existed parallel to temple spells, oral traditions, household gods' charms carved into pottery shards. But the most powerful incantations, those were locked behind temple walls, guarded, copied only by high scribes. Forbidden spells to summon deities control the Nile, even glimpse future events. Most have been lost, or perhaps never written down at all. Outside, the night deepens. You emerge carrying a replica scroll, its text illegible now, but the feeling very real. Like you've borrowed a word too old to say aloud. A breeze stirs the papyrus reeds. Somewhere an owl hoots, and you wonder, what spell might they have left behind for you? The scroll of forbidden spells folds quietly into the shadows behind you. And the night takes on a new scent, something warmer, heavier, laced with sandalwood and lotus oil. You're walking now through the winding streets of Thebes, though it could just as well be Memphis, Akhetaten, or any city where tiled courtyards echo with flirtation and silken curtains sway like gossip in the breeze. Because now we enter the realm of desire, jealousy, fertility, and scandal. Welcome to the boudoirs and harems of ancient Egypt. The architecture here is clever high walls for privacy fountains to cool the air, and perfumed gardens where lovers meet beneath pomegranate trees. There's music floating somewhere, gentle notes from a lute, or maybe the delicate clink of bangles. The air itself seems to blush. You peek through a finely carved screen. Inside, a young woman is applying kohl to her eyelids, using a bronze mirror polished to brilliance. Her servant fans her with a palm frond. She dips a tiny stick into a bottle shaped like a cat. Remember those perfume bottles, and dabs scented oil behind her ears. Beauty here is sacred. A mainstream fact, both men and women in Egypt took great care with personal grooming. Oils, perfumes, shaved heads under wigs, and elaborate makeup weren't just aesthetic. They were signs of purity status and divine favor. Even in the afterlife, a good eyeliner game was non-negotiable. But beneath the surface glamour, the royal family's love life was more drama than dream. Pharaohs often had multiple wives, a great royal wife, who held ceremonial precedence, and several secondary wives, often political marriages to foreign princesses. And then there were the concubines, a kind of sacred dating pool with variable rules. Harem life wasn't quite the pillow fight and grapes scenario Hollywood imagines. It was a powerful, complicated institution, especially during the New Kingdom. Women in the harem were often educated, influential, and occasionally extremely dangerous. Take, for instance, the infamous harem conspiracy of Pharaoh Ramesses III. The story goes like this. One of his secondary wives, Tiye, wanted her son Pentawere to inherit the throne instead of the designated successor. She organized a full-blown coup involving palace officials, scribes, and even members of the military. The plan: assassinate the king during the Opet festival, a celebration when security was lax. The conspiracy failed. Ramesses III was mortally wounded, and the trial that followed was a spectacle. 38 conspirators tried, tortured, and in some cases forced to commit suicide. Pentawere, according to one scroll, was allowed to take his own life. His possible mummy found later showed signs of violent death, and intriguingly was buried unmummified, wrapped only in a goat skin, a mark of disgrace. Even now, Egyptologists still debate the extent of the crime and whether the version we have is sanitized propaganda. But one thing's clear: the harem wasn't just a room full of bored lovers. It was a political powder keg. You wander now into a quieter courtyard. This one hums with music and fragrant steam. A bathhouse where couples whisper behind curtains and servants gossip freely. You overhear a woman reciting verses from a love poem. Your voice intoxicates me more than wine. Your breath is sweet as lotus petals. I would trade my best amulet for one kiss. These aren't royal decrees. They're everyday emotion captured on ostraca broken pottery shards used like notepads. The scribes who copied these poems were romantic, or maybe just bored. Either way, they left behind a treasure trove of yearning. A quirky tidbit. Many love poems feature playful insults, like one man describing his lover's hair as like fish nets, or her walk as that of a goose with pride. Romantic in their own poetic way. Affection in ancient Egypt had room for teasing, but love wasn't always tender. Infidelity existed. So did jealousy. And when things went wrong, the gods had their say. Fertility rituals abounded from amulets shaped like frogs, symbols of abundance to ritual offerings at temples of Hathor and Bes. Hathor, goddess of love and motherhood, was often invoked during childbirth. Bes, the squat, lion-faced dwarf god, protected mothers and infants and scared away demons with loud music and fierce dancing. Picture your chaotic uncle crashing a wedding. Now give him divine powers. You pass through an apartment painted with scenes of couples reclining on couches sipping wine, playing Senet, the board game of fate. In one corner, an older woman presses something into a younger woman's hand. A pouch, a charm, perhaps a love potion made from myrrh honey and powdered beetle shells. You'd think magic would be more romantic. But Egyptian recipes ranged from tender to terrifying. One spell advised writing your crush's name in donkey blood and burning it with sycamore leaves under a full moon. Another collecting a few hairs from the beloved's comb. You're pretty sure that one shows up in modern pop lyrics. But the most sacred bond, marriage. And contrary to popular belief, ancient Egyptian marriages weren't sealed by elaborate rituals. No veils, no rings, no goats sacrificed at the altar. Just a simple agreement: I have made you my wife, and I will care for you. Practical, heartfelt, and usually backed by a legal document stating property rights and divorce conditions. Yes, divorce was common and not scandalous. If a relationship soured, couples could part ways fairly. Property returned. Children stayed with the mother. Ancient Egyptian society in many ways was unusually equitable, especially compared to later civilizations. You sit now in the glow of oil lamps beside an open window overlooking the Nile. The breeze is soft. Somewhere someone is laughing. A couple leans close over shared wine, a necklace glinting at her collarbone. Love scandal, heartbreak, renewal, all of it timeless. You glance down at a scribbled ostracon near your feet. The ink is faded, but you can just make out the first line, "Say to the one I love, you are my sun at dawn." Morning again, and you're on the move, drifting down the Nile on a broad-hulled merchant boat, its sails swelling gently with the breeze. The air smells of wet papyrus, roasted barley, and the faint tang of resin. Palm trees whip past. Egrets scatter. The sun gleams off painted crates stacked with goods bound for temples and cities alike. You've entered the lifeblood of Egypt's wealth. Because while pyramids and perfume spells are dazzling, They don't fund themselves. Beneath the myth and majesty, ancient Egypt ran on a complex and often dazzlingly efficient trade network, both internal and international. The Nile, of course, is your highway. It flows northward from the mountains of East Africa to the Mediterranean, but in Egyptian cosmology, it runs from south to north, from life to death, from the realm of the gods to the mortal world. Upstream is called up, even though it's south. Confused yet? Don't worry, you're rowing with the current. On either bank rise the twin faces of Egypt, Kemet, the black, land lush with crops and flooded fields, and Deshret, the red land dry and mineral-rich source of gold and stone, and the occasional tomb robber. You stop at a riverside village. Here scribes tally fish and wheat, while barefoot children dash between clay granaries. A temple agent oversees the collection of grain taxes, not money, but bushels weighed and recorded with practiced precision. Grain isn't just food. It's currency. It pays workers, fuels temples, and backs royal ambitions. A mainstream fact, Egypt was once called the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. The annual flooding of the Nile deposited rich black silt, creating fertile fields where wheat and emmer grew in abundance. When other empires went hungry, Egypt exported grain by the boatload. You step back aboard and continue north. The cargo below includes more than food. You find bundles of flax soon to be spun into linen fine enough for temple garments, amphorae of wine and beer sealed with beeswax, papyrus rolls blank and ready to receive history, and several crates marked with the hieroglyph for gold. Yes, gold. Egypt's wealth glittered brightest in this metal mined from Nubia in the south. Expeditions into the eastern desert, called the lands of the gods, were treacherous but lucrative. Workers chipped at quartz veins under a sun that could boil sandals. Donkeys hauled ore, and priests blessed the journey. But gold wasn't Egypt's only luxury. You make port at a bustling marketplace, perhaps Memphis, or maybe Pi-Ramesses during its heyday. Merchants call out in a half-dozen languages. You smell cinnamon, myrrh, cedarwood, and unexpectedly pepper. Where did that come from? India? Yes. As early as the New Kingdom, Egypt was trading with lands far beyond its borders. Through Red Sea ports like Berenike and Mios, Hormos ships ventured out to the land of Punt, a semi-mythical region, possibly modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. There they acquired incense, ebony ivory, and exotic animals, including monkeys and giraffes. In one famous relief, Queen Hatshepsut is shown receiving a myrrh tree roots, and all for planting back in Thebes. You stroll through the market stalls. A Nubian trader offers ostrich feathers, while a Canaanite woman unwraps a bundle of lapis lazuli, the deep blue stone beloved for amulets and inlays. A Phoenician holds out a strand of dyed purple cloth, impossible to produce locally. Even Greek and Minoan pottery is here, smooth, spiraled, speaking of distant waves. Trade wasn't just about goods, it was diplomacy. Pharaohs sent luxury items to foreign rulers to win favor or seal alliances. One surviving letter from the Amarna archive features a king from Babylonia complaining, "You sent me 2 minas of gold. You said it was much, but it is nothing." So much for subtlety. You pause at a stall selling cosmetics. Black coal, green malachite, crushed red ochre for lips. The merchant, a sly-eyed woman with gold bangles, tells you they're from Sinai and the Western Desert, and offers a discount if you're royalty. You assure her you're only pretending. You remember a curious tidbit here in Egypt: trade was often run through temples, especially during the Middle and New Kingdoms. Temples weren't just religious centers. They were economic engines, owning land-managing workshops and issuing loans. The Great Temple of Karnak alone employed thousands: weavers, bakers, brewers, metalworkers. As the day cools, you're invited to join a caravan headed eastward across the desert toward the Red Sea. The route is harsh dust wind and endless sun, but you marvel at how well organized it is. Every oasis is mapped, every stop monitored. Camels aren't common yet, but donkeys and oxen do the work just fine. The caravan master carries a writ from the temple authorizing trade. Without it, he'd be turned away or taxed heavily. The system is tight, but also adaptable. Egypt survives because it bends like the papyrus reed, not too rigid, not too lax. You make camp that night near an ancient well. Over spiced lentils and bread, the traders speak of strange lands, places where the rivers flow backward, where the moon never sleeps, where the sea turns red with fire. Some of it is exaggeration, but some, who knows? Egyptologists still debate the extent of long-distance trade. How far did these caravans reach? Was there contact with early Greeks, or even with the Indus Valley pottery shards and scarabs show up in surprising places? Southern Spain, Britain, Central Asia. Are they trade items or just travelers' trophies? The mystery remains. You lie back under a desert sky, now full from dinner and heavy with stories. The stars look the same, but you feel different, like you're carrying half the world in your satchel. Egypt didn't build an empire through conquest alone. It bought it, traded for it, wove it into linen and spice. And when famine or flood came, that network kept it alive. Even in a land of gods, sometimes it's the grain counters and wine merchants who hold the keys to immortality. The night stretches thin as papyrus, and with it comes a hush deeper than silence, the hush of linen-wrapped eternity. You've left the bustling ports and desert caravans behind, and now you stand in the flickering torchlight of a long, narrow corridor deep beneath the earth. This is not a marketplace, not a temple. This is a mummification chamber. You step inside. The stone walls sweat with age. Bronze hooks, alabaster jars, bundles of herbs, everything smells faintly of resin and history. At the center lies a slab dark with ancient oils, and resting on it, wrapped head to toe in layers of linen, is someone who once ruled, once laughed, once dreamed. Welcome to the next step of the journey. Because in ancient Egypt, death is not an ending. It's a transformation. A process so sacred, so detailed, that even a simple merchant's burial could rival a small royal wedding just without the open bar. The process takes 70 days. During this time, embalmers follow a precise and deeply spiritual script designed to preserve the body for the afterlife and protect the soul's chance at rebirth. You watch now as the first step unfolds: removal of the internal organs. A small ceremonial blade slices the abdomen. Out come the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver. Each is washed dried with natron, a naturally occurring salt, and placed into its own canopic jar. These jars are guarded by the 4 sons of Horus, each with a different animal head and a very specific job. You'll never confuse your organs again. But what about the brain? Here's your quirky tidbit. The brain was removed with a hooked instrument through the nostrils and discarded. Yep, the heart was considered the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory. The brain just filler. The ancients weren't impressed by gray matter. And to be fair, they did build pyramids, so maybe they knew something we don't. You peek into a side chamber where natron dries bodies on slanted wooden beds. The smell is sharp salt and thyme. After 40 days, the desiccated corpse is washed with palm wine, anointed with oils, and wrapped in linen, sometimes hundreds of meters worth. But here's where the real magic begins. Each layer of wrapping is accompanied by incantations and amulets, tiny carvings of scarabs, ankhs, and jed pillars slipped between layers to ensure protection. One spell reads, "Do not let my limbs rot, nor my flesh decay. Let my heart beat in the presence of Osiris." There's a rhythm to it. A dance between the physical and the spiritual. The embalmers are both surgeons and priests. And the heart. It is left inside, or if removed carefully, replaced with a heart scarab. This amulet, inscribed with spell 30b of the Book of the Dead, is a plea for mercy during the final judgment. A backup soul in case yours gets tongue-tied before the gods. You walk over to a display of coffins stacked like nesting dolls. The innermost coffin is often gilded and painted with protective deities, eyes wide and watching. One famous example, of course, is Tutankhamun's solid gold mask, a face meant to project divinity. His tomb, discovered intact in 1922, sparked the modern obsession with Egyptian burial rites and the long-whispered curse of the pharaohs. A mainstream fact, many tombs had inscriptions warning against disturbance, but there's no solid evidence that Tut's tomb carried a formal curse. Still, a string of mysterious deaths following its excavation, including that of Lord Carnarvon, launched a media frenzy. Even Conan Doyle suggested elementals were involved. Sherlock would not approve. You notice a stone door nearby, slightly ajar. Inside is a sarcophagus chamber. The walls are painted with scenes from the Book of Gates and the Amduat, 2 underworld guides detailing the soul's journey. You see solar boats, serpent guardians, and the terrifying lake of fire that must be crossed by spell or strength. There's one figure repeated, Osiris, green-skinned and wrapped like a mummy presiding over the judgment hall. His eyes follow you, because this chamber isn't just a grave. It's a cosmic theater, staging the rebirth of the dead. The floor represents the earth, the ceiling, the stars, and the walls are both calendar and calendar. You recall a fringe theory that some tombs were resonance chambers designed to amplify certain frequencies during rituals. Humming, chanting, and even the placement of sarcophagi were believed to produce spiritual vibrations, sound as sacred architecture. You kneel beside a model burial, a small reconstructed tomb diorama with tiny furniture, food jars, even a wooden pet cat. The idea. The dead would use these in the next world. Some tombs even included full-size boats, disassembled and buried nearby for reassembly in the afterlife. You know, just in case you need to cruise through paradise in style. But even with all these precautions, not every soul made it. If you failed the final judgment, your heart was fed to Amit, and your soul vanished. No afterlife, no second chance, complete annihilation. Egyptians feared this above all. And that fear, it drove the complexity of mummification. You stand now beside a mummy. Anonymous wrapped tight hands crossed. A label reads, "Unknown Woman 18th Dynasty." She could have been a priestess, a noble, a dancer. No name, but her linen is intact. Her amulets still gleam. And just like that, you realize mummies are people too. They had families, pets, anxieties, hobbies. Maybe she liked honeyed beer. Maybe she sang lullabies. Maybe she complained about taxes. She is not a prop. She is a traveler. You exit into the night once more. The desert air is cool, the stars unblinking. And somewhere in a hidden tomb, someone lies waiting for their next sunrise, wrapped in spells, guarded by gods, not gone, just preparing. The desert is silent as you approach the ridge. A low wind stirs the sand, and the stars seem to draw closer, as if Egypt itself is leaning in to tell a secret. You stand now at the edge of legend, at the whispered ruins of one of Egypt's most mysterious sites. Welcome to the lost and tangled marvel of Crocodilopolis. Yes, it's a real place. And no, it's not from a cartoon. Known in Egyptian as Shedet, and later renamed Crocodilopolis by the Greeks, this ancient city lay near modern-day Fayum, west of the Nile. It was a sprawling religious center dedicated to the worship of Sobek, the crocodile god of strength, fertility, and the Nile's power. But hidden beneath its dusty surface, a legend almost too big to believe the labyrinth of Egypt. You descend a slope and step into a maze of broken columns and half-buried blocks. Palm fronds rustle. A stork takes flight. There's a dryness to the air here, but something about the place feels damp, as if the memory of water lingers under the dust. And somewhere beneath your feet, maybe, just maybe, lies what Herodotus once claimed to have seen. It surpassed even the pyramids. That's right. The Greek historian visited Egypt around the 5th century BCE and described an enormous labyrinth south of the Pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara. According to his writings, it contained 3,000 chambers, half above ground and half below, filled with carvings, statues, and shrines to various deities. You imagine it miles of corridors, vaulted halls, secret shrines, all meticulously arranged. Not random chaos, but an ordered cosmos in stone. And at its heart, a sacred crocodile in a pool of clear water, wearing golden earrings and fed honeyed cakes. Let's be clear. No archaeologist today has found a full structure matching Herodotus's description. Some dismiss it as exaggeration, mistranslation, or even tourist myth-making. But others insist that ruins beneath Hawara hint at something: massive stone foundations, strange subsurface anomalies, and records from Roman writers like Strabo and Pliny that corroborate Herodotus's tale. Egyptologists still debate the truth. Was it ever fully built? Was it destroyed? Or did it simply vanish beneath the water table, its bricks carried away by later dynasties for other monuments? For now, the mystery remains. You move deeper into the ruins of Crocodilopolis. There's a reconstructed temple facade here, its stonework scorched by centuries. On its walls, murals of Sobek, with his green-scaled face, holding an ankh in one hand and a scepter in the other. He's both terrifying and comforting. His worship wasn't just ritual, it was economic, political, ecological. Crocodiles were the literal lifeblood and the lurking terror of the Nile. You glance down and spot a mummified croc preserved and sealed in bitumen and linen. They mummified thousands, some with baby crocs placed inside their mouths, a symbolic nesting of strength and rebirth. There's a museum in Fayum that holds over 2,000 crocodile mummies, each one tagged and catalogued like scaly time capsules. But not all were just sacrifices. Some crocodiles were kept alive in temple ponds, treated like deities. The best known among them, Petsuchos, the sacred crocodile of Crocodilopolis. He was adorned in gold and precious stones, housed in his own pool, fed and adored until his death, at which point he received a burial more elaborate than many nobles. The priests would then identify the next sacred croc, believed to be a new incarnation of Sobek. Like the Dalai Lama, but with more teeth. You rest now by a stone plinth, said to mark the entrance to a subterranean level. It's sealed, off limits, yet tantalizing. You recall a peculiar tidbit from the Napoleonic expeditions to Egypt. They recorded an underground canal system in this region. Some theorists believe these were part of the labyrinth, an aquatic maze where priests traveled by boat, ferrying the gods from one chamber to the next. There's even fringe speculation that the labyrinth wasn't just physical, but symbolic. A model of the afterlife itself. Winding, mysterious, filled with choices and judgments, some rooms with music, others with fire. And at the center, Sobek, ready to devour or deliver. You step away from the ruins and look to the west. There lies the pyramid of Amenemhat III, his dark granite face worn by time, its once grand causeway, now a trail of scattered stones. This king of the Middle Kingdom ruled during a golden age of stability, and it was likely under his reign that the labyrinth was constructed, or at least begun. You imagine what it must have looked like in its prime. Pilgrims arriving from across Egypt to be awed by its scale. Priests whispering chants through echoing halls. The smell of incense. The splash of water in sacred basins. Crocodiles basking in sunlight filtered through colonnades. And always that hum of power. A structure not meant for humans, but for gods. The labyrinth may be lost, but its shadow endures in every story, every disputed excavation, every whispered promise of a chamber still undiscovered. You press your palm to the warm stone. It doesn't answer, but it doesn't need to, because in this place, memory and myth hold equal weight, and some secrets choose to remain hidden. The wind rises over the ruins of Crocodilopolis, sweeping sand into spirals that vanish as quickly as they form. You shield your eyes and begin your journey east, away from the sleeping crocodiles and the shattered gates of the labyrinth. By dawn, you arrive at a high ridge that overlooks the open desert, and overhead, the sky unfolds into a map glittering with secrets. Tonight, you turn your gaze to the stars. The ancient Egyptians didn't just look at the heavens. They built with them, lived by them, worshipped through them. Above your head is a celestial kingdom, peopled by gods, anchored by cycles, and etched in the memories of monuments. You sit on a cool slab of stone, an old temple roof perhaps. Around you, silence. Above you, Orion gleams in full armor. Egyptians saw this constellation as the divine figure of Osiris, god of rebirth and the afterlife. When Orion rose in the night sky, it meant Osiris was among the living again. Next to Orion twinkles Sirius, called Sopdet by the Egyptians. Her heliacal rising when she first appears just before dawn marked the start of the Nile flood, the sacred inundation that brought life to the land. This celestial event was so precise, Egyptian astronomers predicted it centuries in advance. Even the calendar began here with the rebirth of the river. A mainstream fact: the ancient Egyptian year had 365 days divided into 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 epagomenal days at the end of the year, festival days for the births of key gods like Osiris, Isis, Seth, Nephthys, and Horus. Not bad for a civilization predating mechanical clocks by a few millennia. You walk toward a temple in the distance. This one is small, its reliefs barely visible in the moonlight, but within its innermost sanctum is a ceiling painted like the night. You tilt your head and recognize it, the Dendera zodiac. Lions, bulls, archers, rams. A blend of Egyptian sky lore and later Greco-Roman symbols carved in exquisite detail. Egyptologists still debate how much of this star knowledge was mathematical science and how much was divine communication. One theory suggests the temple priests used secret corridors in monuments like Karnak and Luxor to observe specific star alignments, peeking through hidden shafts that marked solstices, equinoxes, and stellar risings. One of the most famous examples, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Remember that back in Section 3, its internal shafts align closely with the belt of Orion and Thuban, the ancient pole star. Some believe these channels were not just ventilation too narrow for that, but soul shafts, routes for the pharaohs Ka to travel into the heavens and join the gods. There's even a fringe theory, and let's whisper this one, that the pyramids themselves form a map of Orion's belt. 3 pyramids, 2 aligned perfectly, the third offset just like the stars. Coincidence. Architectural accident. cosmic message. You lie down on the stone and trace the patterns. Above, the Milky Way gleams like a river. The Egyptians called it the winding waterway, a celestial echo of the Nile. In death, your soul would travel this starry stream aboard Ra's solar boat, facing trials and monsters, before reaching the field of reeds paradise. That boat appears everywhere, in wall paintings, in coffins, in temple ceilings. Sometimes Ra rides alone. Other times he's joined by gods like Thoth and Ma'at who help him steer. And always every night he must battle Apep, the great serpent of chaos. You spot him now, etched in the ceiling stone nearby. Apep, coiled and fanged, trying to consume the sun. Priests in real life would enact this battle nightly, reciting protective spells, sometimes even burning effigies of snakes to help the sun rise again. You sit up and walk to the edge of the platform. Before you stretches the desert, still vast and whispering. But beneath that sand lie dozens, maybe hundreds of buried temples and tombs, aligned not randomly, but astronomically. Karnak is aligned with the rising sun at the winter solstice. Abu Simbel aligned so that twice a year the sun penetrates all the way to the sanctuary and illuminates the statues of Ra and Amun, but not the statue of Ptah, the god of darkness. Precision or sorcery? You pass into another chamber. This one houses a broken water clock, clepsydra, used to measure the passage of time by flow. Next to it, a merkhet, an ancient Egyptian instrument similar to an astrolabe used to track stars and keep the calendar in check. Priests would rise before dawn, watching the skies from temple rooftops, recording star positions on papyrus. Not for poetry, though, that's tempting, but for practical reasons to schedule rituals, harvests, coronations. They were the world's first astronomer priests. Here's your quirky tidbit: the ancient calendar, despite its brilliance, slowly drifted out of sync with the actual seasons. Because they didn't account for the quarter day, like our leap year, every 460 years, the calendar did a full loop, called the Sothic cycle. Not that most people stuck around to see it, but the priests noticed and adjusted accordingly. Egyptians didn't just track the stars, they lived through them. Your name was carved into time, your fate written in constellations, and when you died, your tomb was arranged so that your soul could ascend not into nothingness, but into the sky's rhythm. You rest once more beneath the stars. The wind hushes, the sky deepens. You feel small, but not alone. Because in this kingdom of sand and starlight, someone is always watching the horizon, and someone else is already preparing the next sunrise. The sky remains wide above you, painted with fading stars as dawn begins to tiptoe across the desert. A breeze stirs from the east, warm and dry, carrying the distant thump of donkey hooves and the rhythmic chant of workers already at their tasks. You sit beside a limestone wall, your fingers tracing the carved grooves in its surface, marks not of erosion, but of intent. Because today we read the walls themselves. You're about to step into the world of hieroglyphics, those intricate, elegant symbols that seem more art than alphabet. But don't be fooled. These signs aren't just decoration. They are divine language, or as one scribe put it, the writing of the gods. You walk into the inner chamber of a partially preserved tomb, and it's like entering a stone library. The walls glow softly in the early light, inscribed with row after row of carved symbols, birds' eyes, spirals, seated gods, snakes, vases, feet, stars. It's a visual symphony, every sign chosen with precision. A mainstream fact, hieroglyphs weren't an alphabet like ours. They blended phonetics, symbols, and logograms, meaning a single glyph could represent a sound like a consonant, an idea like house, or even act as a determinative, a clarifying symbol at the end of a word. Egyptian scribes mastered over 700 signs, and during the Ptolemaic period, that number nearly doubled. No pressure. You examine a line of text. It reads right to left. You know this because the animals are facing that direction. That's one of the beautiful quirks. Hieroglyphs can be written left to right, right to left, or top to bottom. You always read into the direction the characters are facing. Birds don't turn their backs on you after all. A scribe appears. Let's call him Teti, and he's clearly proud of his work. He dips a reed brush into ink made from crushed carbon black and red ochre. Red is used for divine names, emphasis, and warnings. Think of it as ancient boldface. You ask him what the hardest symbol is. He smiles and draws a knot, the tit symbol associated with Isis. It looks simple, but the meaning is layered protection. Blood, femininity, eternity. That's the magic of hieroglyphs. One shape can whisper 10 meanings. Teti shows you a phrase, "I give life, stability, and dominion." It was carved into everything from royal obelisks to bronze mirrors. A formula for power. A wish. A blessing. A boast. You see it repeated across temples, sometimes tweaked, sometimes hidden among prayers. You spot your favorite glyph again, the Ankh symbol of life. A looped cross, simple and unmistakable. You remember the paintings of gods handing ankhs to kings, offering not life but breath. The gift of the eternal inhale. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians believed in pun-based magic. If a word sounded like life, it was linked to the concept of life. Scribes exploited this, constantly layering phonetic jokes into sacred texts, embedding safety spells into names. And names, oh, they mattered. A name written in a cartouche, an oval rope with a line at the bottom, meant divine protection. Only royalty got that honor. If your name was erased, your soul risked being lost forever. That's why damnatio memoriae, the deliberate erasure of someone's name, was considered a fate worse than death. Egyptologists still debate the identity of some blank cartouches found in tombs. Were they lost to time or intentionally destroyed? One popular example is Hatshepsut, the powerful female pharaoh, whose successor had her name chiseled off countless monuments. Spoiler, it didn't work. She's more famous now than he ever was. You walk into a side room where an ostrakon sits on a low table. This is a limestone shard used for casual writing notes, lists, drafts. Think of it as an ancient post-it. You spot scribbles, a love letter, a tax receipt, a drawing of a cat chasing a mouse wearing a kilt. Ancient memes. Maybe. And here's a fun one. A breakup note from a disgruntled lover scrawled in sharp script. Something along the lines of, "You said you would bring figs. You brought none. My heart is sour." Ouch. Hieroglyphs weren't only for tombs. They adorned amulets, coffins, temple ceilings, and even cosmetics jars. Scribes carved them into scarabs, painted them on wooden stelae, and inked them on linen bandages wrapped around mummies. Every symbol was an anchor, a divine tag meant to carry you into the next world. But for all their glory, hieroglyphs faded. With the Greek and later Roman occupations, the language slowly gave way to Demotic, a more cursive script, and eventually Coptic, the Christianized Egyptian language written in the Greek alphabet. By the 4th century CE, hieroglyphs had fallen silent. The last known inscription is dated to 394 CE, carved into the temple at Philae. And then, nothing. Centuries passed. The symbols became mysteries, guesswork, occult symbols, alchemical ingredients. Until one day in 1799, a stone was found near Rosetta, with 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. It took decades, but eventually a man named Jean-François Champollion cracked the code, realizing that phonetic sounds were part of the system. The Rosetta Stone became the key, and the silence began to break. You leave the tomb now, the morning light softening the glyphs as they seem to shimmer under the sun. You think of all the stories trapped in stone for centuries, of all the names forgotten and then remembered. And you remember something else Teti told you. To write is to make a thing live twice. You glance at the stone wall again, and somewhere beneath all the lines and loops and sacred birds, you swear it's breathing. The midday sun casts long shadows across the black land Kemet, rich with silt and memory. You stand on a high ridge, gazing out across the baked earth and shallow canals. Below, farmers coax emerald rows of grain from the Nile's gift, their shadoofs creaking as they raise water to thirsty fields. It looks eternal. But today, you step into a chapter when eternity faltered. Because even gods stumble. Even great civilizations can blink. This is the story of the day the Nile forgot to rise. The rhythm of Egypt, the pulse of its heart, its harvests and its heavens, was the annual inundation, the life-bringing flood. Without it, fields cracked, granaries emptied, and faith itself began to wither. You walk now through a small village in the first intermediate period, a time after the Old Kingdom's collapse, around 2180 BCE. The once mighty pharaohs no longer control the whole land. Temples fall quiet. Local governors rule their own fiefdoms. Bandits roam trade roads. And over everything hovers the silent horror the river is late. In some years, the Nile barely flooded at all. Drought swept through Ethiopia and upstream regions where the rains feed the Blue Nile. Without that water, the sacred flood fails. The black soil dries. The people grow desperate. A mainstream fact. Archaeological records and ancient inscriptions show multiple periods of famine, sometimes lasting years. One stela from the reign of Djoser, known as the famine. Stela describes a 7-year drought with crops failing, people suffering, and temples going without offerings. It's carved in dramatic prose, a blend of desperation and prayer. Pharaohs begged gods like Khnum, the ram-headed creator, who shaped humans on his potter's wheel and controlled the Nile's flow to intercede. Sometimes he didn't answer. You step into a temple half swallowed by dust. Once grand, now sagging, a lone priest tends to a meager offering, 2 fish and a handful of barley. He chants half-heartedly. The sacred lake behind the temple has dried into a cracked basin. Even the gods seem thirsty. And in times of drought, chaos stirs. Rebellions spark. Provinces war. Temples seize land. The ideology of Ma'at, cosmic order, begins to crumble. And what replaces it, Isfet, chaos, violence, instability. Even the crocodiles grow restless. You visit a small tomb nearby, abandoned before completion. The mural inside is eerie. A pharaoh, arms raised, pleads with faceless gods. Behind him, skeletal figures harvest nothing. The colors are dull, the outlines unfinished. The artisan must have left in a hurry, or died. In this time, people wrote letters to the dead, hoping that their ancestors could intercede from beyond the veil. A woman buried near Akhmim was found with such a letter pleading with her deceased husband to stop haunting her. "I have done nothing wrong," she wrote. "Why do you harm me?" Was it guilt, madness, or simply the weight of a world falling apart? And yet even as the old order collapsed, Egypt adapted. You arrive at the tomb of a provincial governor, once a minor noble, now a regional powerhouse. He's taken on titles once reserved for pharaohs. On his walls, he boasts of rebuilding canals, feeding his people, funding small temples. In this vacuum of power, local leaders stepped up. This was the age of decentralized resilience. Scholars debate whether this was a true collapse or merely a reorganization, a pause in royal unity that allowed regional identity and innovation to flourish. Some cities like Heracleopolis and Thebes rose to new prominence. Art from this time is rougher, but also more expressive. You see eyes wide with emotion, lines sketched with a kind of raw human urgency. And eventually the Nile returned. Floodwaters crept back. Fields revived. A new line of kings emerged from the south, Mentuhotep II, and the 11th dynasty, reunifying the country and founding the Middle Kingdom, a time of reform literature and architectural innovation. But Egypt would face this cycle again. During the New Kingdom's decline, drought struck once more. Invasions from the Sea Peoples, corruption in the priesthood, tomb robberies, civil unrest, all signs that the Golden Age was dimming. Later still, in the late period, Egypt suffered further under foreign rule. Assyrians, Persians, and eventually the Greeks and Romans. Yet, through it all, the Nile remained the thread, sometimes full, sometimes faint, but always the lifeline. You walk now through the remains of a granary. The bins are empty, the records long faded. But you can still see the scribe's painted tally marks lines for each sack of grain, each shipment received. The numbers taper off. The final few marks are scratched hastily. A hint, perhaps, of a day it all stopped. Here's your quirky tidbit in times of famine. Egyptians sometimes buried food offerings in miniature form, tiny loaves jars, or even ceramic cows, hoping symbolic acts would be enough to win divine favor. It's sympathetic magic. If you build it, the gods might come. Outside, the breeze picks up again. You see the Nile in the distance, curling through the landscape like a lazy dragon. It looks peaceful, eternal. But now you know better. Even the Nile can forget. Even a kingdom carved in stone can crack. But from the dust of collapse, Egypt always rises again, like the phoenix bird Bennu, another of their sacred symbols. A creature of flame and rebirth, nesting in the branches of the world tree at Heliopolis. You watch the sun dip behind the horizon, and you realize Egypt wasn't eternal because it was unchanging. It was eternal because it adapted, grieved, rebuilt, and remembered. The sun slips below the horizon one final time on your journey, painting the sky with streaks of copper and violet. You stand now at the feet of silent giants, twin obelisks casting long shadows across the temple forecourt. One still upright, sharp as a spear against the evening. The other lies broken, half-buried, like a fallen king dreaming beneath the sand. This is where we rest in the realm of eternal monuments. You run your fingers across the surface of the standing obelisk. Its face is carved with crisp hieroglyphs, names of pharaohs, praises to the gods, invocations for the ages. You recognize a cartouche from earlier Hatshepsut, Egypt's female king, bold enough to raise this needle of stone over Karnak. She called it her shining monument, created from a single piece of pink granite hauled hundreds of miles from the quarries at Aswan. How they moved it, still debated. Boats, sledges, sorcery. You sit beneath it now, watching the sky deepen. The air grows still. A breeze picks up from the Nile, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and ancient dust. In the distance, you hear the faint ring of temple bells echoing across the valley, like voices from another time. This temple may be Karnak, or perhaps the ruins of Abydos is quiet now, but once it thundered with sound. Drums, hymns, chants to Amun or Isis or Ptah, gold flickering in torchlight, statues paraded through incense-thick halls, priests whispering spells, scribes recording every breath. You pause beside a seated statue, so worn its face is just a smooth oval. But there's comfort in its silence. Egypt didn't fear death. It feared forgetting. That's why they built in stone, why they mummified, inscribed, painted, carved. The past was not the past. It was a living presence, a network of names and rituals meant to ensure continuity. But even the best efforts crumble. Many temples lie in ruin, many tombs looted, many scrolls burned or buried. Earthquakes, floods, conquerors all played their part. And still, Egypt remains, not just in ruins, but in imagination. A quirky tidbit to leave with even today, some Coptic Christian rituals echo ancient Egyptian prayers. Some wedding songs still use the same ululation that was sung in tomb rituals. Time folds. You walk now through an open courtyard. The stars above mirror the layout of the Dendera ceiling, Egypt's map of heaven. Beneath your feet, the stone is warm from the day. A cat slinks past, eyes flashing. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar calls. In one final chamber, you find a wall inscribed not with deities or pharaohs, but workers' graffiti. Rough sketches of animals, names scratched in haste. A short poem about wine. The very human fingerprints of those who built the sacred. Because Egypt wasn't just gods and kings. It was farmers, scribes, lovers, soldiers, bakers, midwives, merchants, thieves. It was people like you. And in that realization, you feel it, the hush that only ancient places offer. A hush that says you were not the first to stand here, and you will not be the last. You lay back on the stone breath, slowing. The obelisk above catches a star's reflection. The past folds gently around you like linen. Now the sky turns from violet to velvet, the stars glowing like scattered ankhs on the roof of heaven. The Nile sighs in the distance. Somewhere a temple bell chimes its last note of the night. The wind softens, carrying the warm scent of crushed lotus and ash. You breathe in slowly, deeply, letting it fill your lungs like a prayer. Around you, Egypt sleeps. The statues are still. The gods are silent. The tombs rest sealed and watching. The hieroglyphs on the walls, so bold just hours ago, have begun to fade into the stone, like dreams dissolving at dawn. You lie there listening to your own heartbeat echo in the stillness. It's calm now, steady, like the rhythm of the river returning every year, like the passage of stars overhead, like the careful footstep of a priest carrying a lantern down a sacred corridor. Whatever burdens you carried into this journey have settled. They are dust now tucked gently beneath the sand. You are safe. You are remembered. You are. And tomorrow the sun will rise again over the same temples, the same river, the same gods, watching the world turn once more.